the lucky organizer of this meetup. So thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate the response and the attendance tonight. We're really excited to offer this great event. As the director of HR, I'm going to put a plug in for Solution Street that we're always looking for great software engineers, business analysts, quality assurance engineers, project managers. If you're ever interested, please reach out to myself or Carolina and Christina in the back. I also wanted to give a little plug for our upcoming charitable golf tournament that's happening on September 12th in 3 weeks. If you're a golfer or you're interested in sponsoring us, or if you think your company might be interested in sponsoring us, see me after the event or reach out. You have my information through the meetup. So I'm super excited to introduce Greg, who's going to be our moderator for the meetup tonight, and he'll talk a little bit about Solution Street and introduce our other panelists for the evening. So thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Katie. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. So this is the first time we've done a format like this, so bear with us. So we're going to make this great today. So today we're going to talk about the Model Context Protocol, and we're going to do this in a panel discussion. So hopefully you might have all come here for slightly different reasons, but hopefully you guys all take away something, a little bit of nugget today, and get excited about Model Context Protocol. So a little bit about myself. So my name is Greg Hodem. I'm a managing director here at Solution Street. I've been in the industry for over 28 years now. And I've been in a variety of roles, software developer, architect, development manager, wear a lot of hats. I've also worked a lot of different technologies, Java frameworks, Ruby on Rails, a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of Python, because you can't escape Python now that you're doing machine learning or AI. Also, I've worked on a variety of industries, so commercial and government as well. So, but we're here at Solution Street. Solution Street's been in business for over 23 years now. We're engineering-led organization. Our founder and our managing partner are both software engineers and continue to code these days. So Joel and I continue to hack at it. We have a track record of delivering successful projects for 23 years and working successfully with our clients. And we have an elite team, top-notch team of consultants here. And our big focus is new product development, software construction, as well as reimagining legacy software. So, which AI has helped out a lot recently as well. So let's start by introducing our panelists. And we have one, So we have one panelist that was unfortunately not able to make it, so he's remote today. Well, let's start with Neil. Neil's next to me here. Neil Chaudhry is the president of Vidya LLC. He's a senior software architect and leader with 25 years of experience in modern programming languages in domains including AI, cloud, web development, APIs, cybersecurity, serving government and commercial customers while also contributing to blogs, speaking, and he's also been a podcast guest. Several?
Just one.
Just one.
And it wasn't Rogan, so don't worry.
Okay. So a little bit about Neil. While he's not coding and doing technical work, he has season tickets to the Baltimore Orioles and manages to figure out, this one's for you, Jeff. He manages to figure out a pop culture reference to pretty much every situation like a walking Family Guy. Sounds like you two need to talk. All right, thanks, Neil. So our next panelist next to Neil is Saujanya Vulam. Saujanya is a software engineer with 11 years of experience. She's been delivering scalable UI and cloud native solutions at companies like Yahoo and AOL. She combines her technical expertise with product strategy, system thinking, and she's an advocate for AI-driven tools, and she's been working in that area a lot. Saujanya has 2 kids and loves to spend as much of her free time with her kids as possible. And then our third panelist, who is remote, you want to bring him up there? So our third panelist is, there he is, Pervez Chaudhry. So Pervez is a co-founder and CEO of Gentero. That's an MCP platform as a service company based in San Francisco area. So it should be interesting to hear about that a little bit later. His previous experience includes IBM, BEA WebLogic, Splunk, and a few other high-tech companies that he's both either co-founded or joined at the early stages. So he's currently focused on agentic AI and enterprise-grade AI. Pervez loves mountains. Sorry. He's recently hiked the Canadian Rockies, over 30 miles in 6 days, including 3 glacial lakes. Wow. He's hiked the Sierras in California, the Andes in Peru, and his childhood was in Kashmir. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, all right. And despite the similar sounding last names, you guys were not related, but maybe
You don't think so.
Maybe many years ago, right?
No.
Okay. All right, so
We are worse than Semites in subcontinent, so boundaries are everywhere.
so Pervez is joining us from the West Coast, so it's nice in the afternoon over there, right?
Yeah, it's easy for me.
All right, so let's get started. So we'll kick off the panel discussion, but before I do that, I just want to poll the audience with a few questions, just to kind of see where we are. So how many developers, technical folks are out here? Okay, probably a little bit more than the big majority. Non-technical folks, product owners, product managers. Okay, one. Okay, welcome.
Don't worry, I still got you. Don't worry.
We'll cover you. How many in the audience have already heard of MCP? Any knowledge? Okay. And how many in the audience are actually using MCP? So I don't mean developing, but using it with your AI tools. 1, 2, somebody's back there. Was that Joel?
A little half-hearted
Try.
right here.
All right, so how many people are actually developing with MCPs today? So developing MCP servers, clients, 1? Okay, so that's good. What's that?
Does hello world count?
Yeah.
It totally counts.
I don't know. And then last question is, just in general, how many of you are building some sort of AI agent? And I put that in air quotes. Okay, all right, good. So we got a pretty diverse audience. Consuming? So just a little bit of groundwork here, ground rule, sorry. So we're gonna have a panel discussion now. We're gonna have a Q&A at the end, so if you don't mind holding your questions till the end, I appreciate that, and the panelists as well. All right, so let's jump into the topic. So let's start with the what and the why. And I'm gonna start us off, but I'm gonna let the panelists tell us what they think about MCP in a second. But we often hear that MCP is compared to the USB-C of LLMs, right? How many people have heard that? Less than I thought. So basically what that means is MCP is a standard open protocol or specification that allows you to plug in tools, resources, other items, resources, to provide context to the LLM to achieve something. You could also perform actions. So how did we get here? So way back in July of 2024, which is just 13 months ago, Anthropic started to design, it's pretty much the inception of MCP. Before that, and we may talk about this a little bit later, there are other potential competitors or technologies that were doing similar things, but Anthropic set out to define a standard. So that was in July of 24. November of 24 is when they released the first version of the standard. So that's when it really started to get some early adopters, right? So pretty quickly, we started to see hundreds of MCP servers out there. Not all very good, but actually trying to getting a pretty good adoption. It was really spring of 2025, which is, I guess, when probably a majority of you heard about MCP the first time, is when OpenAI announced that they are going to adopt MCP as their standard for LLM integration. Do you guys remember that? Is that when you first all heard about MCP, perhaps? Okay, that's what I thought. So today there's 9 official, it probably is more, but 9 official SDKs, thousands of available MCP servers, which you'll hear in a minute is probably where the exciting part of MCP is happening. And there's over 70 plus compatible clients out there. So just real quick, I want to do a demo. I just want a level set of what this means at a high level so you guys have a mental picture. before we get into the details here. So Jeff, I'm going to share real quick here. All right, so you guys also, so how many are familiar with Claude? You guys use Claude? Who likes Claude better than ChatGPT? Who likes ChatGPT 5? Nobody. Zero. Okay. All right. So I like Claude as well. I'm trying to switch. So this is Claude Desktop actually. So this is running locally on my desktop. And if we real quick, you probably have seen this demo, but if we really quickly, I'm going to drop the mic so I can type. So if we quickly type in, you know, what's the weather tomorrow in Herndon, Virginia. So right now there's no connection, and I'll just show you this. There's no connection to a web search. There's no tools enabled. It's an LLM, right? So the best that the LLM could do is doesn't have access to the information, right? So it's just telling me what I could do. It's not very helpful because the LLM is a snapshot in time of what it was trained on, right? So just to give you a little bit of taste. So now I'm going to enable a very simple, of course. A very simple local LLM server here that's going to be able to connect out to the weather and get the current weather. So if I run the same query or same prompt, same thing here. Now it should come back. Okay, so here's the first interesting thing, right? It's prompted me. Hey, I'm going to go out. Based on what you just typed in, I went to figure out the tool, and I want to run this thing. Right? I want to run this function essentially. So it's asking me to do that, so I'm going to allow it. So now it's going and running my local MCP server, and here it does. It comes back with the forecast for tomorrow, and it's going to be slight rain. But I think what's the exciting thing here is if you look at actually what's going on behind the scenes, and we'll get into the details in a second. You can see that from the prompt that I put in, it actually figured out the request parameters to send to the MCP server, and then it returned the response, and the response is in JSON, right? If you're all familiar with that, the format for data. And just from this response, it was with that combined with the general knowledge of the LLM, it was able to answer my question in English, right? In a pretty nice format. So anyway, just to give you a taste of, this is by no means all that it can do, but just a very simple example of what a local LLM can do. All right, so we're gonna stop that, and I'm gonna stop talking. So I am now the moderator. But what we're gonna do first with our panel is we're gonna talk about, in your own words, and Neil, maybe we'll start with you. How would you describe MCP? And we'll start there.
Hi, everyone. So I would say if connecting LLMs and tools made agents possible, then MCP helped make agents realistic. And by that I mean that it made the process of building AI agents so much simpler, vastly simpler. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But also in a standard way. And as you all probably know, MCP has kind of become the de facto standard for building AI agents. And I kind of feel that standardization is really important. The web was built on standards, HTTP, HTML, JSON, REST, SMTP. I feel like you need standards to sort of have the gravitas to become mainstream. And with MCP being a standard now, I think that's super important.
All right, great. So Jana?
Hello everyone. So in simpler terms, MCP is a standard that any AI model connects to the rest of the world for enabling usage of tools or connecting to other AI models. So for example, when Greg showed us the Claude desktop, there are 4 parts that we need to know about MCP. One is the MCP host, MCP client, MCP server, and we have the actual backend. So in that example where he showed, the MCP host is the Claude desktop, and there is a part of, and LLM is part of the host, and then we have the MCP client, which is part of the cloud desktop, which enables connection to the MCP server. MCP server is what actually exposes the function calls and the weather app that he showed, the weather SDK, and MCP backend is what is actually doing the actual work, like the weather application or company or whichever it is. In this case, it's the weather app. So that is what MCP is in a nutshell. And so what MCP does to us is what HTTPS has done for web or internet, MCP is doing that for AI agents, to connect to other LLM models and to connect to other tools to enable better, for better actions. Because the difference between chatbots and agents is that chatbots cannot take action, but agents can. With that, we are standardizing that with MCP.
Okay,
So
great.
that's
Thank you. Parvez?
Yeah, thank you for Neil and Sujanya for pretty good description. So just to round it up, I want to use an example, and that example could be call an agent or a program that typically just monitors your Slack channel, and based on the inbound request, it does something with it. This is, by the way, a very common practice now. Number one use case for AI agents is customer-facing support type of use cases, so that's where Slack channel comes in. So in terms of describing it, the agent has to be able to talk to the Slack as a software package, which has over 500 APIs. You could have written some of this at the API level, but if you convert those APIs into MCP tools, now your agent, you don't have to worry about it. So you can actually speak natural language to this tool and not have to worry about the API. It becomes the responsibility of the tool to speak the REST API or SQL query. In case of Greg, you use get weather. That's an API call to request the information. So in that context, think of MCP as a way to either retrieve some information or make an outbound call using natural language abstraction. For some of you, it may also help to know that before MCP, there was a technology that started all of this called function calling, introduced by OpenAI in actually 2023, because LLM only are trained on historical data. So the question came up, how do you make them LLM useful for enterprise? That means it had to retrieve the current information, like Greg showed. For that, they introduced something like function calling. Problem became the function calling that each LLM vendor implemented its own version. Then Greg's earlier point, Anthropic made an open standard. So it's an abstraction, which is very difficult to really explain in a short sentence, but it's a natural language. You don't have to worry about API, SQL, protocol, underneath the cover. You speak a natural language from agent to your backend system. The MCP represents that. So that's a very big evolution in how we do AI integration to the enterprise as well.
All right, thanks, Parvez. So let's move on. So John, you started to touch a little bit on the architecture and design. I want to ask Neil to kind of walk us through a little bit of a deeper dive into the overall architecture. I know a lot of you are technical out there. You're probably looking for a little bit more of the guts. Jeff, why don't you bring that diagram up? So Neil, why don't you walk us through? Here's a good slide. Image we found on the web. To walk through the model context protocol architecture.
Okay, so I think the first thing I want to point out is just how kind of simple this is. There's not really a ton going on that's super complicated here. So MCP is an adapter protocol. It's, for those of you who know, like, it's kind of like JDBC if you write in Java, or ODBC. Like, it's a common way to connect to disparate tools through the same code, essentially. And so we're on the left, we're the user, and on the right is the fun stuff. It's the various services, as Sujanya mentioned, that do things for us. Imagine it's GitHub, it's Notion or Asana or Jira, some sort of project management tool, and Slack, to borrow from Pervez, and Google Drive. Right? These sort of 4 areas that do things that we care about on a day-to-day basis. And we want to interact with these 4 components, and we will do that through the host, client, server, adapter interface in between. The host would be something like what Greg showed us with Cloud Desktop. It could be your IDE. I know Sujana likes Cursor. I use IntelliJ and all the JetBrains ones, just whichever. That's your host. And inside your host has multiple different client code that can then interact with the various server adapters that can then talk to whatever backend service that you care about to do the work. And as Pervez mentioned, through a natural language interface. So you could say things like, show me all the Jira issues that are older than 2 months that no one has written any code for yet. For example, that's something that tells you that, oh, you know what, I'm trying to get my velocity going in terms of like how I'm delivering, and the fact that I have these issues that are sitting there for all this time, that's not a great thing. And so having a natural language way to do that, and we have one person who is a project manager or a business user, like being able to talk to the Google Drive or Jira, that sort of thing is pretty useful. You can also ask about anything on GitHub, create a pull request, find me all the pull requests that are sitting out there right now that have not been confirmed to get merged into the repo. Things like that are like super important that you do on a day-to-day basis that you can do from your IDE or from your Cloud Desktop. You can also, by the way, use your microphone to talk to Cloud Desktop. And so you can actually have a voice interface. And one other point I do want to make is the idea of the local versus remote. So, not to get too much in the weeds because it get a little crazy, but like you can have local MCP servers. So sometimes that's confusing because it's a server, and people often think of servers as being like over there, but it can actually be on your machine. It's a local server that can read your PDFs. I do this all the time. Read your PDFs. I have an MCP server that can help me turn up the volume of my computer, things like that, computer control. But also I can talk to remote services like the Google Drives, like the GitHubs, and those destination servers. And you just configure through different MCP communication configurations through like standard IO, which is for the local ones, and server send events or streamable HTTP, depending on the version, for remote servers. So through that interaction, that's how you can use natural language to interact with all the different components that you work with on a day-to-day basis as a developer or as someone doing business.
So I think we're all familiar, or we are now, about the primitive or the tool usage of MCP. What are some of the other primitives that you can define with MCP server?
Primitives in terms of?
So there's most of what we're familiar with is tools. Like go out and do something called an API. Are there other things you can do with the server? So for instance, context or prompts.
Yeah, and like resources.
Resources.
That's
resources.
That's the big one. So like it's basically like if you want to think of it in RESTful terms, you can think of tools as kind of like post requests and resources kind of like GET requests, kind of, in the sense that with gets, you're fetching some data that is idempotent, right? That I'm going to get some information and just get it back, and no matter how many times you make that call, it's going to be the same result back, right? And that's basically with tools what you're doing. You can reach out and grab a file, a PDF, a JSON, whatever, and that's when you hear the term tools, or resources. That's what you're getting. And tools are more about actually performing what you might say are RPC calls or post and rest, that kind of thing, where you're actually like doing something, performing an action. And that's where most of my work is, but yeah, tools are definitely an important part of it as well.
Okay, great.
I think the other primitive is the prompts.
Prompts, yeah.
Prompts that's used for code generation and things like that.
So we haven't talked too much about your use case, so we're gonna get there in a minute, but
Sure.
you do a lot with the development side or developer side. Have you used the context, that primitive?
Yeah, I've used the prompts for
Prompts, sorry.
code generation.
Okay.
When I was working with Cursor, so we can define certain prompts and put it in the rule files and use them later on for generating code.
So
using
those are
some
kind of like
best
templates?
practices. Templates,
Templates,
yes.
okay, and then the LLM helps you pick the appropriate templates, is that
Yeah.
kind of the idea?
Yeah.
Great,
yeah.
great, okay. All right, so let's move on from the architecture design. I think you all have been I think you're all familiar a little bit now with the concept of MCP and what it is. So.
Hey, Greg?
Yeah, please.
I think I may have a couple examples to.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, yeah. Jump in.
No worries, I understand.
I apologize.
No, if you go back to the previous slide, I just want to explain a couple of things. So again, yeah, I think this is really, if you're gonna remember one thing from today, it's a lot of information. Think of this as MCP is a lot of ways going to look familiar. It's a multi-tier, at some levels, a client-server architecture for the resources, the back-end local file. For example, let me give you one specific example, working with one client where this is SAP in the backend. SAP stores all the purchase order information. So how do you build a application in a agentic world? Agent is just an example of an application, but our prediction is that in the very near future, every application is going to have a part of it is that's going to act like an agent. It could be part of a regular application, but may have to just use LLM and MCP for a certain part of it. So a lot of applications, especially products, going to get infused with this technology. So in case in SAP, I'm some sort of accounting system. I need to get the latest purchase order for Joel from SAP. So in this architecture, you could do all in one client inside that application, but that means you have the integration logic, the MCP, everything all in one. In multi-tier architecture, you, like Neil has broken in here, you separate the two. So all the agentic world or AI world sees everything as a collection of MCP servers, and then the minutia comes in. As a developer, your role comes into, which may be a question for you, and that is, who builds the MCP server A, B, C, and D? Who tests it? Who makes sure it works? That's going to be your new role. So where you used to sit down and build using API, build connectors and test them, you're doing something similar, but instead of building API connectors, you're building MCP servers with tools. So just keep that in mind. There are many ways to build it. That's a longer topic, but you're building the servers. And then in the agent, you're simply using, like Greg shows an example, get the current weather. I get the, in this case, my example, for SAP, give me the latest purchase order of Joel. Joel is the identifier or customer ID, and that's all I need to say. The MCP server will, working with LLM, and now LLMs are very critical in this. Without them, none of it is possible. They figured out, okay, this is server A. Server A knows that it needs to open a connection with SAP, it needs to call certain APIs, it needs to transform the data, it may have to even apply some security, which we're going to talk about that. So the point is that MCP server building is going to be the most critical. The current estimate is about 80% of the work in the AI application is done the MCP layer, because the rest is like LLM anyway. So building agents is going to be a lot simpler if you have the good collection of MCP servers. By the way, server and tool is also used commonly. So hopefully that example helps as a developer what your role would be, and that is building MCP server. And so if you've been building integration code a lot, think of it as just a higher level abstraction. Biggest challenge will not be the code, but different way of thinking now. So hopefully that example helps. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, Neil has something to add.
And just add one thing real quick. You might read somewhere that like MCP solves the M times N problem. And what that means is kind of what Pravez reminded me of, is that if you have, oh, sorry, yes. So if you have, let's say, in my day-to-day, I use Cloud Desktop and I use IntelliJ, let's just say 2 clients or 2 hosts. And I want to use 4 different MCP servers, the ones I mentioned before. Well,
Yeah.
if each of them had their own bespoke integration, that would be like 8 different integrations I'd have to write. And that's the 2 times 4, the m times n problem. And like when with MCP, and why it really simplifies and why it makes AI agents realistic as opposed to just simply possible, is that now with MCP I can just do one thing and have that same kind of connection apply to all of them, as opposed to having a bespoke connection for Cloud Desktop to Google Drive, Cloud Desktop then to GitHub, and then doing the same process for every other client, because I use multiple. And for every other client I have doing the same thing, it would just be multiplicatively difficult. And so MCP makes it very simple by just doing it in an n plus n kind of way, where just hook it up in a very simpler way, bringing that order of magnitude down.
I think one of the things one of you guys touched on was the sort of the orchestration that's happening on the, I guess it would be in the host. How does it know? I guess the question to a panelist, you guys can tell me, how does it pick which tool to use? Like, how does that process work? Like, what do I have to do on the server to tell the LLM, hey, pick me? And how does that orchestration work? Who can talk us
Yeah,
through
I
that?
can go through that. So when the request comes in through the user as a prompt, the host, the LLM is part of the host, and that actually parses all the natural language, and that translates it to the client, and then client actually understands that and picks which tool to pick based on the based on the understanding of the LLM, and based on that the right tool is picked, and it goes to the right tool on the server and does the appropriate action. So
If I can add one thing. So also, if you ever are finding yourself writing an MCP server, you'll often just see that you'll be writing in whatever primitive your language uses. Like, so if it's Java or Kotlin, which is my thing, it'll be a class, and a class has methods, and you'll simply annotate your method. So your method could be like, I don't know, add 2 numbers, and your annotation will say like @tool or something, and it'll be like a nice expressive description that you'll come up with that will explain what exactly your function does and what your parameters do and what your return type represents. Then that goes as part of the prompt, like Sujanya was saying, because then the LLM will, when it's looking at, okay, the user on the left, which is us, asked this, and now how do I take this and map it to all the different tool descriptions that are in those annotations that some MCP server developer created. And it'll figure out, hopefully, which one is right. And by the way, it won't always do it right. That's part of the issue. And one of the things we'll talk about more with MCP, that sometimes it will get them wrong. You can overburden your hosts by giving them, like, just shoving a million MCP servers at them, and they're either going to be slow as they try to like iterate through and figure out which is the right one that they want, or they could do that and still be wrong and pick the wrong one. And that all that is a function of how good the LLM is, how good the tool descriptions were, all that stuff. But anyway, the point is that in the simple case for now, just that your classes, your functions, and your parameters are all annotated with natural language descriptions that all then augment along with your prompt to help the LLM make the distinction.
So it sounds like that description of the MCP server is really critical
Yes.
to getting accurate tool selection for your problem.
Where is the description of the MCP server layer, at the client itself, or where is the description pretty much that will explain what the MCP server is capable of doing and how to call that specific MCP?
yeah, the client has the settings or the properties of which server to connect to. With the cloud example, the cloud desktop will have the properties of which MCP server it's going to connect to.
There are
Go ahead.
room to add one more explanation that may help
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
Neil was saying.
to answer the question. So it may not be clear if you haven't built it that part of the MCP server development, what you have to do is you have to generate the name of the tool, which has to be natural language descriptive, then the description in natural language, like a small paragraph that this particular tool gets the current weather from a given location. Then you also have to provide input, output parameter description. And this is where the magic happens. So when we're given that, LLM is a natural language processing machinery, right? So it's gonna use that information to choose the right tool. Now, if the tools are not described, like I think Neil Sujania mentioned, then that confusion can happen, but it can happen other reasons too. So there's some care to be taken. It's not automated. That's going to be one of the things. But another way that I found in the past is difficult for people to see that this is again, a different way of thinking. If you're a Java programmer, you're used to inserting that particular call to the tool or method. Method and tools can be synonymous at some level. In the code, this is, if you're familiar with the concept of late binding, it's a dynamic binding that's done by the LLM. That's another something you'll have to, as a developer, have to get used to. But once again, the responsibility of a developer for MCP tools or servers has increased. So a lot of energy has to go to get the description, parameters, name of correct, and then being able to also do some additional work can be done in the MCP, so-called the transport layer. That can be a very complex layer itself for orchestration and so forth. So there is a whole new set of skills required to build a register. I'm going to call the register with LLM, and so the runtime can happen. Not a complex skill, but it's a new skill.
All right, thanks, Verdes. There's a ton of time we could spend on this topic. In fact, this is a presentation in of itself, the architecture, but I hope this has given you a little bit of an idea of what's going on behind the covers. Let's move on to the next topic. So now we want to talk about practical applications and use cases for MCP. So we've talked about the architecture, you've heard a lot about the server. What can servers do? Like, what servers are out there? What are the use cases that it's serving? What use cases is it not serving today? And I think Sajanya, we're going to start with you because you're all doing different use cases, which is great. So let's start with yours.
Right. So the two on top of my head. One starting with Cursor. So I've been using Cursor to talk to other models and other tools. For example, I've been using for creating lambdas and deploying code on lambdas and deploying ECS code on ECS on AWS using AWS MCP MCP SDK with Python, which uses Boto 3, which is the SDK that library that it uses. So we can use that, and so we are essentially providing the MCP server details to Cursor to connect to the AWS MCP, and we are doing the operations on AWS with Cursor itself, from command line on the Cursor. So we don't have to get into the AWS console or use AWS CLI. We can just have this in an agent, and it's going to deploy and test and automate the whole thing, and then we can check how it went with CloudWatch. Even those logs can be streamed on Cursor. So that's what I had worked on recently, using the AWS MCP API on Cursor. That's one of the things. So the second thing is Anthropic Desktop. We can use Anthropic Desktop for anything locally. Like if you want to read some documents on, like locally summarize some documentation, if you're writing a research paper, you have a bunch of documentation, summarize stuff, and find stuff within the documentation. So we can use MCP servers for doing that locally on the Anthropic Desktop, because we don't want to put it on ChatGPT or Perplexity for the matter. So those are the two applications that I found for MCPs.
Great. Yeah, so developer-focused productivity. Why don't we have Pervez go? So, sorry, Pervez, before.
Sorry.
Oh, not at all. I think it's already been said that there's lots of use cases. I think it's a very engineering-centric example that Sujanya gave. I think that you can use even tomorrow. Well, some effort, but I work with in situations where we have a lot of business type of use cases, anywhere from automating how you do purchase approval process to customer onboarding, HR, healthcare. I've seen agents now that assist nurses to actually update all of the record. As you know, for HIPAA compliance, nurses and doctors have to fill out a lot of information, and a lot of that can be automated using agents. So there's a lot of examples. Let me share one that we actually built and deployed already. We have a client called Musiversal. Think of them as Upwork for a musician, where a musician can go find a gigs for small, maybe for an event or somebody video, and they can apply for the project. So all of these hundreds and thousands of musicians communicate with their company to find a job using Slack as a channel. Thousands of messages will come in. They have three people full-time just monitoring the channel, and then let's call it triage, either assigning to someone or creating a Jira ticket if there's a technical issue. So we create the agent which will imagine very simply, which can be done other ways too, by using LLM model agents, monitors the Slack channel, new notification comes in, it picks up that text, matches that text to a runbook. Most of you are familiar with what a runbook is. Any technical product will have a runbook, which is a set of rules or scenarios that tells what it can be done. It picks that runbook, and then it, based on that, uses a simple decision tree to say, okay, I can answer that. For example, the runbook says is the password reset, then send them this email to the email in the record, and then let them know your email has been sent to you. But if it's more complicated, create a Jira ticket. So then it goes on. So if you think of an MCP in that context, the agent does this orchestration or workflow, but the agent asks Slack to monitor the channel, then there's an MCP tool for that. There's another MCP tool that will extract the text. There'll be another MCP tool that will match it to runbook. So think of this entire agent as a collection of MCP tools that does all the interaction with Slack, with Jira, and anything in the back end. In some cases, we actually talk to Notion as well for project management for that same use case. So that's a detailed example of an agent that has been built and already deployed. If you are interested, you can go to gentoro.com. We have a video and a lot more description on it, but that's an example of a good, simple, easy to get started agent to build. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bernice. And yeah, what kind of use cases have you seen?
So first of all, I want to be as practical as possible and give you all something that you can go home tonight and try. So I actually have a little list here of things that I think are cool. Client-wise, we already talked about Cloud Desktop, and your IDE almost certainly will also support MCP clients. Warp. Warp is a terminal that is basically an AI terminal, so you can say things like install Python, but you don't have to figure out is it do install Python or is it just you can just go and tell Warp just go do it, and Warp is an MCP client as well. So and it's a terminal. So I absolutely love Warp.
Is that similar to Gemini CLI?
Probably. I've never used it, but
similar. It sounds like
yeah,
something else.
it's definitely it's a terminal, but it's an AI effective terminal. Goose, which is from Block, an open source client, and Goose is awesome. Goose is it's an orchestrator of all these different MCP client servers, and you can do things like build sub agents. You can have a lead LLM and a secondary LLM if you worry about costs. And Goose will figure out what's hard, and I should go to Claude 4, and what's easy, and I can go to Mistral 4 or something, or DeepSeek or something easy. And so Goose can do a lot of things, and there's a lot of material out there from Block, so I highly recommend you check that out. Server-wise, pretty much all the leading databases are MCP servers. So Postgres, Mongo, memgraph, which is something I like for graphs. Figma. I am the worst designer of anything. okay? I have zero artistic talent. My stick figures are ugly, it's bad, but I can actually talk to Figma and have Figma do some cool things, and then if I need it, generate some React out of that, and now lo and behold, I have like a pretty decent UI that looks okay. Playwright, anyone use Playwright already? Okay, good, a couple. So Playwright is basically, it started off as like a web testing tool, but now you can sort of use it, still to web test and to express in natural language the things you want to do with a particular web app you build. But you can also use it to like, hey, fill out this form. I don't want to fill out this form right now. And so you can do this as a local MCP client and just have it fill out forms for you, which can be very cool. I mentioned Google Drive, there's Google Maps also. I actually have a spreadsheet that my friend and I maintain of all the restaurants in the DMV that like we either like or want to try. And I can use MCP to like take that spreadsheet, plot it on a Google map, and tell me what's close to me. I'm hungry, and I'm in the mood for like Thai, and it can do all that for me. I mentioned already, and Pervez mentioned Notion, Jira, Asana, the project management type tools. Those are there. There's a YouTube transcript generator, which I find helpful sometimes. PDF reader, and one that is like under the radar that I find super useful is called Context 7. And Context 7 is basically, anyone heard of it already? I see some, okay. So Context 7 is basically like a way to use natural language to query a GitHub repo and just tell me about it. And so for example, I think I mentioned earlier I like to write in Kotlin, and I'm building some AI agent stuff in Kotlin, and there are two popular Kotlin frameworks for building AI agents. So I said, okay, I was using Goose. I had told Goose to ask Context 7, like, to compare these two different agent frameworks, tell me, compare and contrast their design decisions, the trade-offs they make, whatever, and then tell me where you would use one versus the other. And by using Context 7, by going to GitHub, looking at the repos for the two different projects, and then analyzing them, and then telling me, okay, yeah, I think you should use Coog for this one, and Enable for that situation. And it was so anytime you want to like understand GitHub repos or documentation or things like that, Context 7 is where it's at, very helpful.
Real quick, what's the most bizarre MCP server you come across? Since you seem to have surveyed a lot.
Bizarre.
And I'm putting you on the spot here.
So I will say this. I was going to mention this later, but I'll say it now. So there is a website called Glama, which I would also recommend, GLAMA, that basically has a lot of MCP servers on there and ranks them by like security, license, and functionality. And I wouldn't say that they're scary in the sense because I didn't use it, but there are some that have like Fs in security, and I'm like, no, I'm staying away from that. Okay. So those are the scary ones, but I stayed away from it. But yeah, so Glama is a good place to sort of see those things.
So you said the S word.
Which one?
Security.
Oh, yes.
That's what we're going to talk about next. It's probably what half of you here from.
Yeah. I'm very
All
good
right,
at segues.
security, privacy, and trust. How important is that to all of you out there? Okay, goes without saying.
How did
So-
not all of you raise your hands?
Yeah, I know. I was a little surprised by that, actually.
Like, what is that?
Come on.
Security?
So-
you can give or take.
Yeah, I don't know if you've all seen it, but there was recently, actually it was in the spring, but a Medium post that went viral called the S in MCP stands for security. So you notice what's missing in that? So it's essentially an eye-opening article and really highlighted some of the vulnerability, no, I shouldn't say vulnerabilities, but some of the shortcomings potentially of MCP and using MCP. Not all to do with the standardization per se. But what I want to start with, and maybe Pervez, we'll start with you. Why don't you walk through your take on where we are, the current state of the art with MCP, security, privacy, and trust?
Happy to, Greg. So first of all, I think it's important to know that there are many layers of security when it comes to in governance, when it comes to AI. When you're building an AI application, everybody calls an agent, are using a desktop, like clouds and so forth. But they're only somewhat useful. As soon as you build custom application, security, you have to, first of all, first order is within the agent itself, you have security issues, which is a pretty detailed topic. The big things come out, make sure the prompts are not erroneous, some prompt validation, those kind of things. A lot of big words are like guardrail, putting it on, which is collection of keywords that you don't allow in the prompt. There could be a lot of issues. But then MCP has its own layer. So at a very high level, think of MCP as an API gateway and a data transport layer built into one. In other words, it can make, as Gina mentioned, it can make outbound API calls. So it acts like an API gateway. And so you have security issue around that. You don't want it to go do anything that you don't authorize. And the second part is you're transporting data through these pipes. That means you have to worry about data security, data privacy, so forth. But let's go to the next slide, Jeff, if you don't mind. Then it probably gives some visual. It's a pretty complicated thing that at our company, we'll take a look at it at a very big picture. What are going to be all the major issues that we think going to become either are or going to become relevant? Talking to Neil about getting ready for this call last week, he mentioned all of the old issues, the software. One of the things that I will never forget, he said, you know, the old, Neil, you may have to correct me exactly how you said it, but all of the old software best practices are more important than ever before, because you will hear the rumors like, oh, you don't know, nobody needs software programmers anymore. Absolutely false. This is where, so just as that, for you need a good software practices, you need good security practices. So let me just go through a couple of them at a very high level. This assumes that most of your server will not be local. For example, you're working with SAP and Jira and Salesforce and backend data and Snowflake or a lot of banks that we're working with, they have custom apps, but they want to reach them from an agent. How do they do that? Well, they create MCP layer in front of, by the way, now there are tools available which can take any API, including our product. They can generate all the MCP tools that you need. You're not going to have all the tools pre-built for you. So big opportunity opens up. So in short, security, number one, you have to authenticate the person. Like, is Joel who he is saying as Jeff is pretending to be Joel? Of course, we already been doing that in our products before. The same applies here. Authentication, you have authorization. Is Joel allowed to access something? Or Katie allowed to access something else? So how do you know what the permission levels are? Also, you can call it role-based access control. Transport security, encryption while you're moving the data around. Sandbox isolation, meaning that you're going to separate certain environments, development and test versus production. Data protection and redaction, the data is very sensitive, is HIPAA or government compliance. How do you send it to an LLM? You may have to redact some of the data. How do you redact the data that goes to LLM is useful? Very complicated topic by itself, but the idea is that we've been doing data tokenization already, and that can be useful in this case. So in short, I won't go into every detail here, but the idea is that you have to look at the overall architecture and our point of view. In this case, a middle tier gateway or a proxy server becomes relevant where you want to implement this. Otherwise, you have a direct connection to database from your LLM. You don't have control over the language or the tools. We see a future where each MCP tool will have its own access control level where it be allowed to be used by certain folks, not by the others. Or even if it's used by multiple people, then it is going to behave differently depending on the user. So this is a big picture where you have the agents. Again, this is the different way to describe it, which are MCP clients. They're talking to backend system. In this middle tier, whether you're building yourself or using off-the-shelf product, you have to do these top 5-6 things regular basis. Third part, last part I would say is that none of this is all reinvention. For single sign-on, integration with Oktas of the world are one pass could be. For the cloud security, for vaults, product can be integrated with existing vaults from Google, for Amazon, HashiCorp. Same thing for permissions, you can go to permit.io, set that up. You should be able to use them with the MCP server. So those are some of the examples. at a high level. I realized that did not really give you any specific way to use it, but just highlight these are the issues you have to deal with it.
Okay, so just a follow-up, what advice would you give to an organization that's looking to adopt MCP in terms of trust? Like, how do you build that trust? You've gone through actually some examples of this is standard software practices, and we've been doing good security practices for decades now. But it is a new technology, and people are rushing out there. Is there any advice you can give to the folks out there to talk to their executives about adopting MCP now?
So there are, in terms of the software team, the development team, the engineering team, there are two layers. One, making sure that you have everything in the back end has permission level set up. In other words, a lot of file system, some databases don't have anything. In SAP and big databases, you will do that. So first of all, make sure everything has access control, permission defined, well-defined policies for that. And then you come into middle tier. In some cases, you don't need to do anything extra. It will just deny it because you are going to pass through the user credential through all of this. I didn't mention that. So user credentials. So if the backend says the database sees a user that doesn't have access to certain columns in the table, it will deny it. So first of all, making sure the backend is secure, which may not have been, because now you're opening Pandora's box. If it's open, if it's not specifically prohibited, it's going to get abused. Second thing is, I think that when you're building MCP tool, you have to see if you are bringing data from multiple databases that may create a new data representation of the person. For example, for HIPAA, you may create a new primary identifier that may not have existed in individual records, but now when you combine them from multiple sources, now you have direct identifier and quasi-identifier. So you have to look at what you have gathered into the MCP tool or agent, and then act on that. In that case, requires acting in the middle tier, but first and foremost, do on the front end. The third best practice, I would say, but everything that you have, the security infrastructure, whether it's a Docker level security, everything, make sure that is carried into your MCP world, not leave it behind.
All right, thanks, Barclays. Neil, anything to add?
So just to sort of center it back a little bit on MCP and to integrate in what Praveen is saying. MCP does not mandate or provide too much guidance on things like security. There is certainly some stuff about OAuth and those kinds of matters, and separating authorization server from the MCP server, blah, blah, blah. There is some guidance, but it's not nearly as extensive as it needs to be. Now, that doesn't make MCP insecure per se, but what it means is that we have to bring our own knowledge and expertise, and we can't rely on the protocol making us do something. Software is still software, architecture is still architecture. All the things that we've always had to care about, observability, resiliency, disaster recovery, logging, UX even, type safety, domain-driven design, all these kinds of things we've learned about for the last 20 years, at least me, I'm old, that like, they matter still, and not only do they matter still, they matter more now. Because with all this unpredictability and lack of determinism and all that stuff with LLMs, they matter more. So MCP will not compel us to do these things the right way. We have to bring it ourselves and make sure we have the discipline and the rigor to build these architectures the right way. And I think that's what Praveen was getting at with a lot of the stuff he's showing here. All these things are super important. They've been important for like 30 years. And so applying them to the MCP world, where like, and this is just a rhetorical question, like how do my credentials compare to what the MCP server's credentials are? If the MCP server is allowed to, I actually saw someone on social media, was it LinkedIn or something? Anyway, they were just like losing their minds because their agent had gone and like wiped out like a production database and had like, wiped out their code and made all these changes they didn't know what to do. And so there was no big Control Z they could do, right? And so there comes a matter of, again, resiliency, backups, disaster recovery, transactional rollbacks, things like that. All these ideas we've always had, they matter even more now. And so you just have to keep that in mind, that MCP will not save you. And a lot of the other standards that are coming along, they're not going to save you. You still have to bring all your knowledge to bear.
Thank you, Neil. So obviously this is a huge topic. We're unfortunately going to move on, but we'll have a Q&A at the end, and I'm sure you probably have some follow-on questions.
Hey, Greg, I do want to
Go
add
ahead.
one thing very quickly, which Neil reminded me. In that case, if you think of MCP server as a software application itself, then all of these things will apply. Think of it as a piece of software that you have written, it does something, you have to apply all the traditional privacy rules to it. I think that will cover a lot of ground for you. Thank you, Greg, sorry for that.
All right, thank you, Chris. All right, actually, we'll slide right into the next topic. Is, now that you've heard all of that, you may have some doubts. Is MCP ready for prime time? There's thousands of servers out there now. There's varying degrees of success with them. So John, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So when I was using MCPs for the two use cases that I mentioned, one with the cursor, when I was using it for deploying lambdas or running stuff on lambdas, I saw frequent timeouts because the MCP processes were taking longer than the normal API calls. So that's one thing that I observed. And the second thing is when I was doing observability, like streaming logs on Cursor and other IDEs using MCPs, it was very clunky because probably it was slow, as well as it was doing pagination with the logging. So that was also very clunky. So those are the two things that I found, apart from all the risks with respect to the security that we saw. Those were the limitations that I found while developing with MCPs. Over to you.
Okay, Neil?
So the answer is yes, number one, it is ready. But with all the caveats we've already talked about, that there are some servers out there. MCP is almost too easy. Like, to install a server is so easy that you can just go and, like, everyone's got a server out there, and you just, hey, just go grab it. And that's why I suggest using things like Llama, or making sure that you're getting a server from a trusted source. And so there are those sort of concerns you have to worry about. But if you trust them, then the things you can do with MCP are so powerful, especially when you coordinate them. And like, I can say, for example, I mentioned context 7 before. Use context 7 to like read this repo, and then create a project for IntelliJ that sort of that builds out some agents that do this, and it can be a long prompt, by the way. Sometimes I write really long prompts, and one agent does this, one agent does that, one agent does that, and here's the flow, and use context 7 to understand the APIs of that agent framework, which is called AIM-Babel if you care, and create a project and open it in IntelliJ. And all those things are in MCP, or multiple MCP servers that are running to do that. And that's pretty cool. Of course, if you have too many, and I've seen this in Goose a lot when I use it, that like if you have too many MCP servers activated, it'll slow it down. Anyone ever use IntelliJ here?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So like, remember when like, if you had too many plugins activated, that thing was slow and it would take forever. When you fired it up, it would take forever to index. Like, that was the worst. And so you'd have to go and like turn off all the different plugins that you weren't using. Similarly, I've noticed that sometimes I have to go and deactivate certain MCP servers that I don't use all the time because it just gets too slow. And it can take like 10 minutes for me to get an answer. That's just too long. Like, I'm willing to wait a little bit, but not that long. So there are things like that that can happen. You don't want to overburden your clients with like too many servers. So just be judicious about the servers you find, and then don't have them all on at once.
Can I answer?
Thanks, Neil.
Yeah. Despite all the risks and the issues that we found, we're still using MCPs right now, and also deploying with them into lower environments. Not yet into production, but lower environments. And also, I'd like to add to what I said previously. I did notice the sluggishness that he mentioned before as well. And I had to turn off a lot of plugins that I found. And I was going to mention one more thing about the usage of MCP on cursor when I was using that for lambdas. I had mentioned previously that there were timeouts. For that, when I increased the timeout settings on AWS, I was able to deploy them. So despite all the risks, I was able to do the deployments using MCPs. So it was not a deal breaker still, but yeah, I just wanted to mention the risks.
Can I add one quick thing?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up for Savjana. How much time do you think you save your team by using MCPs for your deployment and
Right,
generation?
right. So for this project, I was the only person on the project. So I did the entire work, DevOps, Ops, prod, deployments,
So did it
development.
make you more effective then? as
Yeah,
a
it
single
was.
developer?
It increased the productivity multifold. So that's that.
Good, yeah.
So we mentioned time in terms of, but you also have to think about another resource, which is tokens. One thing that I found is that, like,
That's a big one.
yeah, especially when you don't have a lot of money. So you have to be careful about, like, when you're using a lot of servers and your clients are just going and chugging along, that you're not like just killing yourself on like tokens. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's Vegas, except I'm losing a lot, and so yeah. So the token usage, and that's why I like how Goose lets me define like a leader in the secondary, that like it can know. And when I write my own servers, I'm careful to like make sure that I use, like Claude or a fancier, more sophisticated LLM to sort of do orchestration. But if I'm just doing a web search or something dumb, then like use a much simpler free model like a Mistral or something like that. So just keep aware of there's time and like the seconds you might lose with a lot of servers activated, but also token usage.
Perfect. What are
So,
the challenges?
good
Have you
example.
seen challenges that prevented? Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to come from the different side. I think question is, are we as career professionals are ready for MCP or not? So I would say MCP is evolving. It is a less than 1 year old technology. I haven't rarely seen technology evolve and mature at this pace. Early in my career, I was involved with Java. Similar thing, Java came about. People's question, is Java going to be around? And the rest is history. So this is really a future for how you're going to build application, how those applications will talk to anything external. I won't even worry about how many are pre-built available, because now, as I mentioned, that's not as easily visible, but the reality is you can take any API and create a set of custom MCP tools that does exactly what you want to do. By doing so, you can also add security capabilities into that. Pre-built, you can't really do much with them. So there are two parts I'm trying to propose here. One, I think start experimenting at a very small scale. Look at some example, build a couple of agents that use MCP, but custom use of it is very key here as a software developer. The only thing I would say that in terms of its readiness, I think that as long as you have a good software development practices, security practices, it can do pretty much anything.
All right, thanks, Burgess. All right, so we'll go to the next topic is what's next. So let's start with you, Neil. So what do you see? How do you see MCP evolving in the next year or two? What are some of the new things on the horizon?
So I think one thing that's a big deal is, I mentioned at the beginning about standards and how I think that's important. But right now, MCP is a de facto standard in the sense that like it's still owned by Anthropic. And even though everyone's bought in, which is why it's become a big deal, it's still owned by Anthropic. And so what I would like to see and what I think they want to do is to have a consortium or some sort of like organize, kind of like the Java community process or W3C for the web, whatever, some kind of like global organization that can actually sort of keep things moving forward as opposed to just Anthropic running the show. Number two, the big one, we've already talked about it quite a lot already, is the security part of it, that how is the OAuth piece going to evolve? I actually saw someone challenge the OAuth premise the other day, so maybe we might go back and like rethink that. I think that's a bad idea, but that's a whole other topic. I think the OAuth way is the right way to go. Making sure the MCP server does not have the responsibility of being the authorization server in the OAuth. I don't know how well you know OAuth, but it can be complicated. But I do think that having the MCP server do too much would be a problem. So anyway, the point is that's going to be evolving security-wise. And then one thing that I'm very interested in is a brand new feature, this idea called elicitations, which is basically the MCP server coming back to you for information. The example I think is fairly straightforward is like, let's say I use some sort of like agent to order me pizza, and the credit card I gave it didn't work. I forgot to update it after I got a new one and they changed the date. So elicitations, the server could come back to me and say, hey, I need a new credit card. Can you hook me up? And so elicitations are a way for the MCP server to reach back out to the client and ask for more information. And so that's, I think, a very cool feature that's coming in MCP.
Do you mean credit card to coming back? Into the LLM? That's scary.
I mean, let's assume that like we've solved all the privacy and security matters, and we have this trusted pizza agent, this little Caesar who can do this for us. But yeah, certainly with that caveat that elicitations are a way for the I can't tell if that's like the chair or my knees. Or some way for the MCP server to get more information than you had given originally in the first prompt.
So this is to build a more comprehensive context, essentially.
Yeah. Or that, but also to just solve the problem in a way that imagine we talked earlier about how you annotate the parameters and the function calls and all that. Let's just say that in your prompt you didn't provide one of the parameters, and the MCP client or the server has figured out that, oh, you know what? I know this is the tool I want, but they didn't give me all the parameters I need. So let me reach back out and get that extra parameter, specifically ask for it, and then, so that's what elicitations would do. It's a sort of conversational kind of thing.
Great. So we're running a little short on time, but do you, Pervez or Sajana, do you have anything else to add for this one?
Yeah, I think mostly a lot of people ask me, will AI or MCPs replace jobs? That's the question I've been asked a lot in conferences or at workplace. I don't think jobs will be replaced, but I think they will evolve and change, like how accountants were a few years back, they're not right now with Excel and other things. So just like that, I think there'll be newer jobs that come up and there's going to be a lot of evolution. But yeah.
We'll all be writing MCP servers.
Yeah.
Okay. Pervez, anything else to add?
I would just add one thing to Sujania's point. I think that software development without adopting AI, there are other jobs within AI that don't require MCP, but if you're an enterprise application developer today, if you don't adopt any AI and these new, much more sophisticated way of doing the integration, then I think your skill would be outdated. That I do see. There's no avoiding that, but I do think that we have to evolve and learn about the new technologies, and then I think the job would be safe. As far as the MCP itself is concerned, I think it's going to continue to evolve. A lot of work to be done. It is entirely possible that it hits the wall at some point, something new takes over. For the next 12 months, I don't see any of that happening. So, but if you know MCP, whatever comes next, it'll be a small help.
You said 12 months, that's like 30 years in AI.
I'd like to add
It
one-
is, yeah. At this point, I don't see in 12 months anything changing, but beyond that,
I get it.
it. Yeah.
So, John?
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing. So I've been also asked if MCPs will replace APIs, but no, they're just, they're not a replacement, they're just another way of calling APIs. That said, I think MCPs will get APIs closer to the non-technical group of people like HR, finance, health, so that they can use natural language to call APIs and use the tools that we talked about, which are nothing but APIs or functions, and use prompts to utilize the resources better in easier way.
So it's funny, as a developer, I know we kind of have a movement away from commenting code sometimes and self-documenting code. This is interesting because I think commenting your tools, your functions have become much more important, right? So it just occurred to me. But
Calling annotation.
annotations. That's fine.
I
So
think in panel discussion like that, we've been very agreeable, but there should be some controversy.
Oh,
But
boy.
see, I'm working with about a half a dozen software companies where they want to primarily interface, they want to provide this MCP tool because maintaining APIs is very expensive for them. So I would say that there will be some cases where you may be forced to use MCP instead of the RESTful APIs.
interesting. All right, well, like I said, we're running a little short on time. Why don't we go to closing questions? So we're going to do a round of questions. Maybe we'll do two. But I'm going to ask each one of you. First thing is, what was the one thing that you wish you knew before you started MCP? Now that you've been working with MCP and MCP servers and that technology, what's the one thing you wish you would have known when you started? Now that you know. Neil. or you want to think?
He looks so ready.
Maybe Neil's not ready.
No, I mean, it's one of those things where it's a hard question only because the whole thing is new. Like MCP new, sure, but LLMs are new to me, or were at least. You know, they're relatively new. Understanding how can it fit in my workflow, which tools do I like, how do I separate what Sam Altman tells me from what I see with my own eyes, you know? So like there are these kinds of things that like I'm always wrestling with, MCP or not. But the main thing with MCP, if we're going to focus just on that, is like I said earlier, just be careful not to grab at every server that you find, because you can Google literally like whatever something that you want to do, and then you'll say okay, and then you put MCP on it and Google it, and like you'll get some or Perplexity it, and like you'll get an answer, and you're going to go and run to download it, and just you have to be very careful that you are not downloading some kind of Trojan horse, some kind of like Bitcoin miner. That you want to be very cautious because it's very alluring. Like I said, it's very easy to set this up, cut and paste some stuff into like Cloud Desktop, and boom, you're off, and you can go do some things. And it is too tantalizing. So just be very, very careful not to go and just grab whatever MCP server is out there, and just make sure that you trust whatever it is that you found.
Yeah.
So, John?
So I didn't know about the GLAMA listing of open source MCPs and ranking until recently. I wish I had knew that before so that I have an understanding of where the MCP stands before I used it. So that was one thing that was a good eye-opener for me.
Okay, and Pervez?
Again, I think I have a different perspective, more personal. We are a software vendor building tools and technology to enable MCP environment, and when it came out, instinctively it felt like this is going to have adoption, but we could not, as a vendor, could not anticipate the speed and the enormity of how fast it became popular. In other words, it was a big surprise to me. Wish I knew that was going to happen, that as a vendor we could have been even more prepared than we are today.
All right,
And
great.
I think the important for that is, for the rest of us, is if you haven't, in your job, you haven't seen it impacted today, but you'll be surprised that it's gonna impact you sooner than later.
All right, thanks, Parvez. And we want to wrap up there with the discussion part, but I do want to thank the three panelists here. Thank you, Neil, thank you, Soljana, and Parvez for a great talk. So why don't we circulate the microphone? So we're going to open up for Q&A now. And Katie's going to walk around, so Parvez can hear.
I don't think it's
us as
connected.
well.
Yeah, I don't think it's working at all.
Oh, how's it? You want to use? You can use this one. I can talk.
No, I can hear you now.
Okay, it wasn't on.
Anybody, any questions?
Yes, here. I'll go here first, yeah.
So obviously the answer is going to be, it depends, like every software version. But can you see any situations where you want to develop your own MCP servers without having an MCP Gateway as sort of like your front, sort of like you throw an Nginx in front of any kind of, or other type of thing? I'm just asking.
I can give you a quick.
So you mean just for my own fun, or like
No,
or
like
for real?
business-wise, yes, for real. I mean, can you imagine, should I ever be doing MCP servers, or should I be assuming that I'm gonna be putting a more hardened, potentially gateway that's set for dealing with like, you know, DDoS kind of things, so I don't have to embed that in my
Yeah.
lower.
So for me, it doesn't depend. I would say that you absolutely have to have a gateway. And the reason why I say that is because going back before AI, right, we had a lot, I mentioned earlier that we need to always bring our existing software engineering architecture ideas to bear. And there are a whole bunch of distributed systems patterns out there, and one of them is the API Gateway pattern, which does a lot of important things: routing, authentication, logging, a lot of cross-cutting concerns that are super important. And with MCP, it only becomes more important. Now, maybe the way the API Gateway works could be different, because there has to be, like, there's going to be way more calls. You might have to do more in terms of like asynchronous programming, like a lot of like queues and those kinds of things, as opposed to like, synchronous HTTP APIs. There's gonna be stuff like that might change the way the gateway works. But the API Gateway is a pattern that I think is super important, regardless AI or not, and it just has to evolve in a way. To like support an MCP world.
Basically, I was trying to think if there's any situation, maybe something small enough or who knows what, whether you create an MCP server without also having sort of like an MCP gateway as the front.
I think they go hand in hand, right? Because of the security risks. And if you need an MCP, you would add the security layer to it.
Somebody over here.
Parvez, do you have anything to add to that?
I
You're
do
in this area, right?
So
Yeah.
we are an MCP gateway vendor, but I would say yes, there are.
I'm pretty sure you were like.
This one was queued up.
Yeah, this one.
No, I'm kidding. Come on.
Seriously, there are scenarios that you don't need it. For me, my very early alma mater was a company called WebLogic, which built a Java application server. Neil mentioned API gateways, and in a way for Java, there was an application server because applicants were not allowed to touch databases for the same reason that we don't want to have LLM go to databases directly. You want intermediary. But there were use cases where you did not need an application server. You build just use the JVM to build your Java application, and maybe you connect it to one database to do that. So I would say there are scenarios where everything is packaged, contained together. It doesn't have a lot of moving parts, easy to do. But when you build an enterprise application where your application, RK agent or desktop, connected to multiple backend sources, then I think it starts to dictate an intermediary to, if nothing else, just to isolate the two beasts.
All right, another question?
I think you made a interesting statement earlier in the conversation, right, when you're talking about MCP really selling with N times N, right? Problem when you're connecting all of these different API tools. One of the things, right, in standard software engineering, right, when you're authenticating these tools, these things are really deterministic for which follows which sort of services. But obviously with LLMs and with AI, right, you mentioned that it's probabilistic, right? It's going to give you the best or the response that it thinks is the best, right? In terms of like what tools it have available in the context. How do you go out, right? Especially when you're thinking about in terms of scaling really enterprise applications, building out solutions with these MCP servers and these applications in mind to ensure, right, that you're not going to have 100%, but have 99.9% sort of like accuracy in terms of ensuring the proper services connect to one another. Are there any tools, testing frameworks, or things that you set up in your day-to-day that ensure that that is something that is going to be like a good standard moving forward?
That's a great question. Who wants that one?
I'll do it, but
Okay, sure.
no, you can first. You go first.
Okay, sure. So, for me, the testing tools would be similar to any enterprise testing framework with respect to the applications, the APIs, the underlying APIs. Otherwise, with respect to the models, which is on the other side of the client, for that, there are many evals that you can use, observability and evals, like Langsmith, WNV, VB8. So you can use these evals to measure the accuracy, testability of each model. So those standard measurements that are used for measuring the model accuracy can be used here as well. And with respect to the other part of the testing, that is to the APIs, API layer, that would be standard, like unit testing, integration testing, everything else is going to follow. The additional ambiguity here is the LLMs, right? If they're calling the right functions. For that, I think the evals would help. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, a follow-up. Part of that, I think, and I'm going to throw this out at you guys, part of that is the prompting of the user for what's going to happen, or the visibility, right? The transparency in terms of what the LLM selected in terms of the tool. I'm going to take a little bit further than you, but what I've heard is going to happen, or potentially happen, is prompt fatigue, right? You keep getting prompted, do you want to allow this, do you want to allow this? So where is that going to go? I fear that an LLM could hallucinate and pick the activate Skynet function instead of what I really want.
So 2 things for me. One is, don't use an LLM for a problem that can be solved by something that's not an LLM. One thing that I've noticed is that okay. So there was ProPublica did a story about Doge, and they were at Doge. They were feeding. They wanted to know the value of a contract, so they would feed parts of the contract. Now, by the way, government contracts are long documents, much bigger than a context window. So they would feed like I don't know, 2 pages of like a 100-page document, and say, tell me how much the value of the contract is, and it would be wrong almost all the time. It turns out there's the USA Spending API that just says, given a contract number, it'll tell you what the value of the contract is. And these are, presumably, if Elon went pick decent people who can you wanted some saucy talk there, so, writing an API client in your sleep is that's all stuff we can do like that, right? I mean, that's easy. Why not just go hit the USA Spending API and get the answer? Why do you have to use ChatGPT to try? And in a completely haphazard way where you didn't even give it the whole contract. So that was a case where you could have solved the problem without using an LLM and therefore without getting into the risk of non-determinism. So number 1, don't use LLMs for every single thing, only when you absolutely have to. Number 2, I keep saying this over and over, so sorry for being a broken record. Bring all your existing software engineering to bear, and in this case, I'm talking about observability. So make sure that you're logging and tracing and tracking every single, who's doing what the actions are, what the outcomes were, putting that stuff in Splunk, just all those kinds of things you need to do. Number 3, last one, in terms of actually doing the testing of the evals. There are certainly actual companies that do this sort of thing that you can hook up with if you want, but also just in principle, there are ways to test the fancy term is invariant perturbations, things where you know you're testing for things that are probabilistic. So you would say, for example, let's say forget about AI for a second. I want to test my sentiment analyzer in ML, and if I say like, I like London, that should give me positive sentiment in my classification, okay? If I switch it to I like Paris, I should still get positive sentiment, right? Because even though I changed the thing, I did not, that was a perturbation, as they say. I didn't change the actual like answer for what this machine learning classification algorithm should say. The like part is what matters. The thing I like is irrelevant. And so the point is that, and you can go and look this stuff up, but the bottom line is there are ways to test for things that are probabilistic, because there's other things out there in the world, like in physics and such, where you don't have determinism, like in quantum and stuff like that. You don't have determinism, so there are still like techniques for testing. So again, don't use LLMs for everything, do all your observability, and either go to a company that does evals, because there are dedicated, bespoke eval companies, or look into these like probabilistic testing techniques.
Pervez, with that?
I think that was well covered, so we'll move on to the next.
All right. Maybe one or two more questions? Shreyal and Holmson.
Hi. I'll just take the testing piece a little further, because the way this whole setup looks like is there is a prompt or a chat prompt and a human prompt that is being translated into an API call eventually. The prompt can vary in so many different ways. With APIs, it was easier because the request was very set as per a spec, and testing was a lot more easier.
Data, basically.
Yeah. So how do you counter that? Because as we have seen with a lot of the chatbots in the past years, it was just we test as much as we can, and let's just observe and monitor. Is that the route we are taking with MCPs as well?
Oh, I just feel like I'm talking to more or less. So it's kind of like the same sort of idea of the invariant perturbation stuff, that you have to like, I still think those three pillars are kind of where it's at for me. Like, I don't know any better than those three. Again, like I said, just avoid the LLMs if you can, and just make the problem go away. Because I'm a big fan of like, the way you solve a problem is to like not have it be a problem. Then like, always observing, and like, you're not gonna just go right to production, because you can definitely go through and like do your sort of blue-green deployments and things like that as well. Again, these are pre-AI ideas. The idea of like, blue-green deployments and canary deployments, things like that, these go back forever. And so you can then do all kinds of testing that way and figure out if there's anything that's weird that you need to account for. And then, like I said, also the invariant perturbation type tests, or going to like dedicated eval companies. So I still think those are the only ways, because with human language, there's so infinite variability. And I think that we're not quite there in terms of any particularly clever ways of solving this problem, except for relying on the things that have worked in the past. Pervez, you want something out of this?
I do want to add one thing to it. So I think that when the example of how prompts can vary, and then how do you know which one is going to work the best? There is a data point I want to share first, which is today's common knowledge becoming that if you ask the same question to LLM 8 times, that you can be sure one of those 8 answers is correct one. This is the level of accuracy that the LLM scientists, if you will, the AI model guys will actually have written white papers and stuff like that on it. So that really, to me, it means that you really have, when you're building an agent and you are going to use prompt to invoke the MCP tool, first you have to build good MCP tool. That's going to be 80% of the work. You have to test them. To test them, you need a framework to test it, where you can issue prompt and see the result. You should be able to trace that however you do it, you should be able to see what did the tool actually do. So in a way, it looks like a traditional software development test cycle, but the idea is that you want to try many different prompts from your application or agent before you know which one. And once you have picked the one that works, and you use only that one in your application, because you are in control of the tool and the application. But if you pick the right one, then you become a lot more deterministic in that case. Never be close to what Neil is talking about. Deterministic is deterministic. This is like real time, near real time, just approximate. So this is going to be much better accuracy. To improve the accuracy, test at least 8 different versions of your prompt and enhance them and test it. So there's no bypassing that.
I will mention that I just saw last couple of days a story that 95%, this I think is an MIT story, or research from MIT, 95% of AI deployments are failures. 95%! I mean, that's an A at failing. And like, that's a very high score. And so, I bring that up just to say that like, I think a lot of people have not solved this. and also, to some degree, there's probably not a lot of interest in solving it. Like, people just want to rush something out there to prove that they're in the game, and they just don't have the rigor and the discipline to do it right. So they've not thought through the actual business process. They haven't bothered to test and do observability and do all the rigorous things that we're supposed to be doing, and you get failure. And so it's an evolving thing. But I think at least that this is a group that cares about these issues. That's the first step that matters, that we actually care about doing it right, and that we want to take the steps necessary to do this the right way, knowing all the risks that are there for ourselves and for our users.
All right, thanks, Neil. I think we're going to wrap up at this point, unless somebody has a burning question.
If you don't mind, just
Yeah,
very
sure.
quick. So I was just thinking about this, right? MCP getting into conversation, like, it's coming up, right? And bringing ideas from other worlds, like two-phase commit or like, options request to APIs. So it may be a stupid idea, but I'm just, checking it out. What if LLMs being non-deterministic, right? And now they decide to call some API, but they're not going to actually execute the command of the API. Every API has a documentation. Maybe it has an LLM-friendly documentation, and that will be always sent to the response first. Right? Two-phase commit, right? Your coordinator will always ask, like, issue a first phase request again, get some confirmation, again it sends a second request, right? Same thing with like parse request, like option request. Before calling an API, you get an prefetch option request. Everything good, okay, now I'm going to call the API. So similarly, like LLMs, what if they always call like through MCP, like, hey, I'm going to call this XYZ API, but I'm not going to call the API. Before calling the API, I want to see like what is this API about. I non-deterministically, I decided this is the API I'm going to call. Okay, give me the documentation for this API. And this documentation will be like user-friendly prompt. Suppose I say like, hey, update my address, right? And I have a choice. LLM can directly call the update address API, which could be wrong also. Whereas before calling the update address API, it will look at the documentation of the update address API, which will say, hey, you are updating your personal home address for this customer, blah, blah, whatever it is. And LLM is going to read that back to the user, or whoever is, maybe the agent. And probably human in the loop, right? And they say yes. Now this time LLM will deterministically go and call back the same API because it has the API in the memory and it knows like AI or to call this. I don't know if you made it clear, but
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, and that is the reason we have resources, which are the get calls that Neil was talking about before. That's one of the primitives of MCP. And when we are implementing the MCP, we can do that, what you just mentioned. So it is also recommended to do that if you're updating data which is sensitive to update, like you can get a human confirmation based on that you can go ahead and update the data. And also to get the information about the resource, whether it is a database or an API call, to get additional information, we can get that and then show it to the user if need be. So yeah, we can, but we have to make sure that is done in the implementation. So it is on us to do that.
So.
If I may, I think that belongs in the MCP tool layer itself, where what Sujai mentioned is the discovery capabilities of the MCP layer itself and the tools that can be used to do that. But it also could be another concept of retrying. Whoever asked that question, I'd like to have a further conversation with you, because in our product, in the gateway part, we also generate the tool where we can add these capabilities. We are thinking of doing it, we haven't done it yet. So I do like the idea, the way you are thinking. It's discovering, evaluation in a simple term, evaluating the call and then evaluating. LLMs are very good at comparing and making decisions. So I think that question was a very good leading question in terms of where MCP tool creation, generation, testing needs to go. Building the resilience and trying. Cursor is so good at it because it actually internally generates the code, does something with it, and retries it again multiple times before it even presents to you. I think that idea can also be applicable to MCP tool itself. How do you create, try, generate, all of that. So it's a iterative process that can happen under the cover.
So I know it's getting late. I'll just say real quick that I know that when I use Junie, which is JetBrains' cursor, it basically comes out with a whole plan. So I'll ask it to do something for me, and it has a whole like pretty lengthy description of like what its thought process is, why it's going to do something, what it's going to do, how it's going to do it, and then ask me like, you want to do it? You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. And in that case, I'm basically the human in the loop, right? And then that's sort of what you're getting at, I think, right?
Sort of, but the metadata about the action, right? All these things are like, the plan, whatever you say in the console log. They're all in the part of MCP or AI world, right? The LLM world. The API owner, the developer, doesn't have much role. I mean, all they do is write an API and they're gone. So I'm trying to shift the ownership from a little bit from MCP towards the API developer, where, so it's kind of, I think you're aligned on that. The only thing is the information that you see in the plan, right? It has to come from the API, not from like, record, like, Sanjana was saying, like, or not somewhere within the MCP world, but it has to, because API is the system of record, right? It's authority. When API says, hey, I'm going to do this, and that's more deterministic. And anything outside API, LLM, whatever decision you make, like whatever accuracy you try to achieve, end of the day, it's still non-deterministic.
First of all, I applaud you on your startup idea. I think this is fantastic. But number two, like, it's like I feel like it's sort of complicated because, unless I'm not understanding you right, because it's who's doing the orchestration. Like, who's the one who is, because it sounds like you're saying the API should be the one, the API call that the MCP server would call, that's the thing that should be sort of making a decision?
So, no, the orchestrator is like still the LLM, the agents,
Okay.
whatever it is.
Okay.
The only thing is, to make the determinism, they have to, like, imagine like we have Swagger spec, right, like OpenAI documentation. And maybe every API has another metadata, which is called like LLM documentation, right? And this is like a prompt response. So a prompt response will be hard-coded within the API. So this prompt response will appear in the logs, in the chat response, or agent response, wherever it is. They don't make up the word because it's a hard-coded word that is the API documentation. So, because if LLM is trying to construct all the response, it could be non-deterministic. Whereas if LLM says, hey, blindly, it probably involves change in the MCP protocol also. Instead of constructing the words, it has to go to API and say, because it already made a decision, hey, I'm going to call XYZ API. It knows that. All it needs is, okay, I made a decision. Now I have to give a prompt back to the user saying, hey, I'm going to call XYZ API.
Maybe it's solicitations.
Yeah.
So for that, they can get the information metadata from the API document. So I'm not sure if I'm clearly explaining it.
I know we're getting late here, but I guess I'll just say that maybe think about it. And the MCP spec is on GitHub, and if you want to like ask questions or even suggest change the spec, by all means you should do so. But yeah, I don't want to I know people are getting late here, but I appreciate the question, and I think it's an interesting
Afterwards,
idea.
Yeah, no,
we'll talk, yeah.
Sorry, Neil, if I may, a shameful plug, those are the issues that we've been thinking, trying to address, because it is at the, lack of better, from the MCP infrastructure layer that has to address that, among other things, include MCP Gateway. So again, happy to have that conversation. I could not see who was.
I was gonna say, Pravesh, would you mind sticking around for a few minutes if people have questions for you?
Oh, for me, it's still early, so.
Yeah.
I'm happy to,
Yeah, you got plenty of
take it
it
offline.
Okay.
It is a very advanced topic, I must admit, where everybody's just trying to figure out where to get started with MCP. This is not the topic for that level of conversation. For me, I would say the closing thought would be find a way to build a couple of MCP, either pre-build, but also don't be afraid to use your API, some API that you're interested in, generate MCP tool, encode something. It's a really interesting process to go through.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank again the three panelists for the audience for coming. We're the Nova Start Software Architecture Roundtable. If you have an idea for a topic for the next time, please, Katie's in the back here. She can help coordinate that, or me, or anybody with a solutions feature.
Or want to speak?
Or want to speak, absolutely. But thank you again. Have a great night.